ChatGPT said, let's begin where all transformation begins. Not with action, not even with intention, but with recognition. Recognition of the story you've been living of. Because whether we are conscious of it or not, every one of us is living a narrative. We wake up each morning not just into a new day, but into a storyline, a silent script running beneath our thoughts, shaping our choices, our relationships, even our limits. The question is, who wrote that story? And more importantly, why are you still living it if it no longer serves you? You see, the human mind is a master storyteller. It takes our experiences, our fears, our inherited beliefs, and it weaves them into a narrative that explains who we are. Psychologists call this the narrative identity. It's the internalized story we tell ourselves about our past, our present, and what would we believe is possible for our future. And here's the catch: the mind is not concerned with truth, it's concerned with safety. So it holds on to the familiar, even if the familiar is painful. It repeats patterns not because they're empowering, but because they're known. That's how we find ourselves stuck, not because we lack strength or intelligence or opportunity, but because we are loyal to a version of our story that has long expired. We become prisoners of outdated narratives. I'm not good enough. It's too late for me. People like me don't succeed. These aren't facts, or these are fragments of a story written in a moment of pain, disappointment, or fear. And we've allowed them to become the whole book. Sometimes these stories don't even come from us. They were passed down to us like heirlooms, quiet expectations from society, family, culture, of stories about who we're supposed to be, how far we're allowed to go, what's acceptable, what's not. And we internalize them without questioning. We carry them for so long they begin to feel like truth. But truth and conditioning are not the same thing. And that's why this moment, right here, right now, is so important. Because change doesn't begin with doing something different. It begins with seeing differently. It begins with interrupting that automatic narrative running through your mind and asking, is this story mine? And is it still true? Let me be clear of, you are not your trauma. You are not your failures. You are not even your accomplishments. Of, you are not the person someone once said you were in a moment of anger or rejection. You are the storyteller. And that means you have the right, the responsibility to re-author your life. But re-authoring your life requires courage. Not the kind of courage we see in heroic movies, but the quiet internal courage to sit with yourself and confront the lies you've believed for too long. It's easier to blame the world, to point to external circumstances and say, that's why I'm stuck. But the real work, the real shift, happens when you look inward and realize the call is coming from inside the house. And that's not a moment of shame. That's a moment of power. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So yes, reflect on your story, understand where it came from, how it shaped you. But then live forward, choose differently. Because while you cannot change the beginning of your story, you absolutely can change the meaning of it. And when you change the meaning, you change the direction. Now, I'm not suggesting that rewriting your story means pretending your past didn't happen. This isn't about denial. This is about authorship. Even the most painful chapters can be reframed. Maybe the rejection was redirection. Maybe the loss taught you depth. Maybe the failure introduced you to resilience. When you reclaim your story, you don't erase the scars. You redefine what they mean. And let's be honest, sometimes the reason we don't change our story is because we've grown comfortable in the role we've been playing. Victim, martyr, overachiever, people, pleaser. These roles give us identity, but they also limit us. And breaking out of them feels like death to the ego, but it's the only way to be reborn into your truth. So if there's a whisper in you today, an inner knowing that says, I'm meant for more than this, listen to it. That whisper is your truth trying to rise through the noise. Don't silence it with logic or fear. Let it speak. Let it breathe. Because it's not asking you to take a leap. It's simply asking you to wake up. The story you're living now may have brought you here, but it doesn't have to take you further. You don't need more time, more money, more validation to begin changing it. You just need one thing: the willingness to stop pretending that the current story is the only one available to you. And when that willingness meets clarity, everything changes. So before you take a bold step, take an honest look. Because the most powerful change begins when you stop living the story you inherited and start writing the one you were born to live. So once you've taken that first honest look, once you've begun to recognize the narrative you've been living in, the next question naturally arises: what part of it needs to change? Not in a vague, wishful way, not in a way that sounds nice in theory, but fades in the face of reality. I mean in the raw, personal way that demands honesty, clarity, and a little bit of discomfort. We often say we want change, but let's be honest, what most of us really want is improvement without disruption. We want our lives to transform without having to disturb the structures we've built, even if those structures are no longer supporting us. But change, real change, is not cosmetic, it's structural. And that means something has to give, something has to go. So let me ask you something: what is no longer in alignment with who you are becoming? What part of your life, your routine, your relationships, your environment, your self-talk is quietly contradicting the person you want to be? Because the truth is, we always know. Deep down, beneath the noise, we already know what's not working. We already know the habits that drain us, the people who dim us, the choices that slowly eat away at our peace. But we bury that knowing under business, under distraction, under the false belief that we'll deal with it later. And later becomes never. We convince ourselves to stay because we don't want to hurt anyone, or rock the boat, or face the unknown. But what about the quiet damage being done every day we remain in something that no longer serves us? What about the slow erosion of self that happens when we continue to negotiate with what we've outgrown? This is the part of the journey that requires brutal clarity of, and I use the word brutal intentionally, not because you need to be harsh with yourself, but because you need to be unflinchingly honest. No sugar coating, no justifications, just truth. The kind that clears the fog and forces you to name the thing you've been avoiding. Maybe it's the job you've been telling yourself is secure, but which leaves you creatively starved. Maybe it's a friendship that's rooted more in shared history than present harmony. Maybe it's a story you're telling yourself that you're not ready, not worthy, not capable, that is silently scripting every choice you make. Whatever it is, it's not about blaming, it's about acknowledging. Because what you don't name, you can't change. The philosopher Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, what we don't bring into awareness, we continue to repeat on autopilot, in cycles, without understanding why. But once you name it, once you bring it into the light, you gain agency, you move from passive participant to conscious author. Sometimes what needs to change is internal, a mindset, a belief, a fear. And sometimes it's external, a toxic relationship, a draining job, an environment that doesn't support your growth. Both matter. Both are valid. And both require courage. But clarity must come before courage. You can't take a bold step if you don't know where you're standing. That's why this moment, this process of honest identification, is not a pause before the journey. It is the journey. It's the clearing of the path, the reclaiming of your direction. And yes, it will likely be uncomfortable. You might face guilt, doubt, even grief, for the parts of your life you once loved, or for the versions of yourself you're letting go of. That's okay. Change is not clean. It's rarely convenient, but it's necessary. Don't underestimate the power of this step. To identify what needs to change is to declare that your life is worth examining. It is to say, oh, I refuse to sleepwalk through another season pretending this is enough. It is to interrupt the cycle with a question that shakes the foundation. Is this who I want to be? Is this the life I want to live? Not someday, not eventually. Now, we spend so much of our lives waiting for the right time. But what we're really doing is waiting for the fear to disappear. And it won't. The fear will always be there, but once you get clear on what must change, that fear becomes secondary, because clarity fuels conviction, and conviction moves mountains. So take time with this part. Sit with the discomfort. Ask the hard questions. Journal it. Speak it aloud. Whatever you do, don't look away. The clearer you get about what needs to change, the more natural your next step will feel. Even if it's difficult, even if it's messy. Because when you know what no longer belongs, you stop trying to fit yourself into spaces that were never meant to hold your growth. You don't need to fix everything overnight. You don't need to have the full map. You just need to identify the weight you're no longer willing to carry and begin. Clarity is the birthplace of change. And until you're willing to be radically honest about what's holding you back, You'll never fully step into what's waiting for you. So ask the question, listen for the answer, and then prepare to move. Once you've recognized your story and become clear on what needs to change, the next step is both the simplest and the hardest. Decide on the one bold step you're willing to take. Not tomorrow, not when everything makes sense, not when all the stars align. Today. But let me be clear about something. When I say bold, I don't mean dramatic. I'm not talking about reckless leaps or grand gestures that look impressive on the outside, but leave you confused on the inside. Boldness isn't about spectacle. It's about alignment. A bold step is anything that disrupts your current pattern and brings you closer to the truth of who you are becoming. It's a choice that may seem small in the eyes of the world, but feels revolutionary in your own. Because it shifts your direction, even slightly, and that shift over time changes everything. There is a misconception we carry, especially in a culture that glorifies overnight success and breakthrough moments, that real change must come through something massive. But psychologically, the most lasting transformation often begins with the smallest act of self-respect. The moment you say no to what drains you, the moment you say yes to what inspires you, the moment you make a phone call, submit the application, end the silence, speak the truth, or simply stand up for yourself for the very first time. These are not small steps. They are bold acts of self-liberation, and they matter. Why? Because action is how identity begins to shift. You don't become courageous by waiting to feel brave. You become courageous by doing something in the face of fear. That single step, however uncertain, tells your mind, we are no longer waiting. We are becoming, and the mind listens. The psyche begins to recalibrate. It starts shedding old identities because you are no longer feeding them. You're choosing something different, and every choice is a declaration. But this is where many people get stuck, not because they're unwilling to take a step, but because they're trying to take the perfect one. The right one. The one that guarantees safety and success and zero pain. Let me offer you some freedom here. There is no perfect step. There is only an honest one. And honesty is enough. You may not know what step number 10 will look like, but that's not your job. Your job is step 1, the step that brings your internal clarity into external motion. Maybe that step is a conversation you've been avoiding. Maybe it's deleting the number, signing the form, booking the appointment, or simply waking up tomorrow and doing one thing differently, one small thing. That's all it takes to shift momentum. Philosophically, momentum is not just physical. It's emotional. It's existential. Momentum is how we begin to move toward our highest self. Not because we have certainty, but because we have direction. And that direction is born from choice. One choice, and then another, and then another. But let's not romanticize this process. Bold steps are rarely comfortable. They often don't feel good in the beginning. In fact, the first bold step may trigger anxiety, resistance, even grief. Why? Because you are walking away from something familiar. You are choosing not just a new action, but a new way of seeing yourself off. And that will unsettle everything inside you that was built to protect the old identity. That discomfort is not a sign to turn back. It's a sign you're on the edge of something real. So how do you know which bold step to take? You already know. It's the one you've been circling in your mind for weeks, maybe months. The one that keeps whispering, it's time. The one that feels both terrifying and deeply right. That's your step. That's your initiation. And if you feel fear, good, that means it matters. Fear is not the enemy of transformation. Complacency is. Fear is just the noise that shows up when your soul starts to move. Let it speak, but don't let it decide. And if you still don't know what step to take, begin with this. Do one thing today that your future self will thank you for. It doesn't have to be revolutionary. It just has to be real. Because the moment you take aligned action, no matter how small, you break the illusion that you are stuck. You are never stuck. You are simply standing still in a story that needs movement. And that movement begins with a step. That's the beautiful paradox of transformation. It doesn't come from waiting until you're ready. It comes from moving before you are. It comes from choosing to disturb the comfort of familiarity in favor of the freedom of becoming. And in that moment, something profound happens. You stop being someone who talks about change and start becoming someone who creates it. So take the step. Not the perfect one, the honest one, because one bold, aligned choice has the power to interrupt the narrative and rewrite the rest of your story. You've taken the first step. Maybe it was a quiet one. Maybe no one even noticed except you. But something inside shifted. Your decision became action. And yet, this is often where the real work begins. Not in the excitement of starting, but in the resistance that follows. That space between who you were and who you are becoming can be one of the most fragile and uncomfortable stages of transformation. And here's the truth: no one says enough growth will test you before it rewards you. The discomfort that follows a bold decision is not a mistake. It's a sign that your old patterns are being interrupted. And what's uncomfortable isn't always wrong. Sometimes it's necessary. When we step out of our comfort zone, we step into the unknown. And the unknown, psychologically speaking, triggers our most primal fears: fear of failure, of rejection, of abandonment, of being exposed. These fears aren't irrational. They're evolutionary. The human brain is wired for survival, not for growth. It doesn't care if you evolve. It cares that you stay safe. Familiar equals safe, even if it's painful. So what happens? The moment you take a bold step, your mind begins to negotiate. It reminds you of every past failure, every doubt, every reason to turn back. You begin to question the path you chose, even though you know it came from clarity. That inner friction, that tug of war between your higher self and your protective self, is part of the journey. And unless you expect it, you'll mistake it for a sign that you made the wrong move. But this is where transformation deepens, when you stay the course even as discomfort rises. Think of it like breaking in a new pair of shoes. At first, they rub against all the places where your foot has grown used to something tighter, smaller, more constricted. But if you keep walking, those shoes begin to mold to your true form. The discomfort passes. The fit becomes natural. Growth works the same way. One of the great illusions we must confront is the idea that transformation should feel good all the time. We crave certainty, ease, affirmation, but most of the time, real growth feels like letting go of a rope you've been clinging to for years without knowing what you'll catch next. It feels like grief. It feels like fear. It feels like a kind of psychological disorientation. Why? Because you're not just changing your behavior, you're changing your identity. And the ego resists identity death more than anything else. But here's what's on the other side: liberation. When you endure the discomfort of growth instead of running from it, you begin to witness your own becoming. You start to trust yourself, not because things get easier, but because you become stronger. You learn that you can survive the discomfort of saying no, of walking away, of showing up, of starting again. And that's the kind of self-trust that cannot be gifted or taught. It must be earned through lived experience. Psychologically, this is also how resilience is built. Every time you face the discomfort, instead of retreating into old patterns, you rewire the brain. You teach your nervous system that it is safe to expand. You begin to stretch your window of tolerance, not just emotionally, but existentially. You learn how to hold both fear and forward motion at the same time. That is the real work. And don't confuse this with toxic positivity. I'm not saying you have to love the discomfort. I'm saying you must respect it. Respect the fact that growth will challenge everything you once thought was fixed about you. Your fears, your boundaries, your limits, they will all come up for review. And that's not a crisis. That's the invitation. Yes, there will be days when you want to go back. Days when the uncertainty feels heavier than the old pain. Days when the voice of fear gets louder than the voice of truth. But on those days, remember this: you are not going backwards. You are being refined. Discomfort is not the enemy. It is the proving ground, the initiation, the sacred space between breakdown and breakthrough. The more you lean into it, not avoid it, not numb it, not fight it, the more power it gives you. Because you begin to understand that your capacity is far greater than your comfort. And once you understand that, you stop shrinking. You stop bargaining with your own potential. You stop asking for permission to become who you already are underneath the noise. You begin to own your path, even the messy, uncertain parts of it. Because in the end, what defines your transformation is not the moment you made the decision. It's the moment you chose to keep going when everything inside you said stop. So don't turn back just because it's uncomfortable. Turn toward the discomfort and walk through it. Because on the other side of resistance is not just a new version of your life, it's a new version of you. And that is worth every step. By now, you've recognized your story, you've named what must change, you've taken that one bold step, and you've learned to sit with the discomfort that follows. But here's the next truth that many people miss, And it's the turning point in whether this transformation becomes lasting or fleeting. You must shift your identity, or not just your actions. Because let's be honest, anyone can change their behavior for a little while. Anyone can start something new, break a habit, try a fresh approach. But the reason most people eventually fall back into old patterns isn't because they're lazy or unmotivated. It's because they're trying to live a new life while still seeing themselves through the lens of the old self. And that contradiction always creates inner conflict. This is where psychology and philosophy align in a very simple but powerful truth. You cannot outperform your identity. If you still see yourself as the person who fails, who settles, who hides off, who waits, then every bold step you take will feel like an act, like a costume. And eventually, you'll get tired of pretending. The only way to make lasting change is to become the person who naturally lives that change. But how do you do that? You begin by realizing that identity is not fixed. It's not a fate, it's a function. It's a function of your repeated thoughts, choices, and experiences. Neuroscience now confirms what ancient philosophy has been whispering for centuries: the self is not static. It's plastic. It can evolve. It can stretch. It can be rewritten. And that process starts with conscious self-definition. You must begin to speak to yourself, act, and carry yourself as the person you are becoming, not as the person you used to be. This isn't about faking it. It's about aligning your internal narrative with your emerging truth. Ask yourself, what kind of person makes the kind of choices I want to make? What does that person believe about themselves? How do they respond to challenges? How do they carry their voice, their boundaries, their vision? And then start showing up as that version of you. Not once, not when it's easy, every day. And yes, at first it will feel strange because your brain and body are still calibrated to the old identity, the old emotional signatures, shame, guilt, self-doubt. They'll still echo in your system. But this is where consistency becomes the catalyst for identity shift. When you repeatedly act in alignment with the version of yourself you're stepping into, your brain starts to update its map, and slowly your subconscious catches up. Over time, you stop saying things like, I'm trying to be more confident, or I'm working on being disciplined. And instead you just are. Confidence is no longer a performance. Discipline is no longer a battle. They become natural extensions of who you've chosen to be. But here's the nuance that matters. This is not about perfection. You will still have days where you fall into old habits, old thoughts, old doubts. That's human. The difference is those moments no longer define you. You recover faster. You no longer identify with the failure. You see it as feedback, because now the dominant voice inside you is the one you consciously chose, not the one that was shaped by fear, shame, or survival. And this shift, though quiet, is revolutionary, because once you anchor your identity in the future you're building, not the past you're healing from, you stop needing constant motivation. You don't wake up every day trying to convince yourself to change. You are the change. Your choices flow from your identity like water flows from its source. Clear, effortless, natural. This is also how you break cycles, generational, emotional, behavioral. Because you're not just changing your actions, you're changing what you believe is possible for someone like you. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into inherited patterns. You stop apologizing for your growth, and you begin to take up space, not with arrogance, but with ownership. It's a quiet kind of power. And it doesn't scream. It doesn't need to, because it's rooted. And what's rooted doesn't chase. It attracts. It creates. It becomes. So yes, take bold steps. Make the hard decisions. Embrace the discomfort. But as you do, don't just ask, what do I need to do? Start asking, who am I becoming? And then live as though you've already arrived. Not in delusion, but in decision. Because transformation doesn't happen when the world finally sees you differently. It happens the moment you do. So if you're rewriting your story, don't just edit the plot. Step into a new author entirely. Because when you change who you believe you are, you change what you believe you're capable of. And that changes everything.